will collect them and look through the questions. But so I'm gonna start this panel, because that's what we're here. So I was hoping that each of you could introduce yourselves, because I think that would be the best way for us to get to know everybody. If that works for you all.
Okay.
In whatever order you would like.
Okay. I'm Janine Bertram and did a little over 4 years in prison for bombing a bank robbery, being a member of the Jackson Brigade. And I think, I was thinking about political life, and I realized I probably was a revolutionary when I was in elementary school. Because my first protest was passing out these flyers that I made that said, "Don't call up Mount Rainier, call up Mount Tacoma." So I didn't know it was called colonialism. Anyway, in the early 70s, probably you all weren't even born. I organized the Seattle Coyote, which was co-op your old tired ethics. And it was, we did it as primarily as a sex workers collective and worked to criminalize prostitution. We did not win. And at that point, I was already close to Full Brown, who was another member of the brigade and left the planet, but was a political prisoner as well. And Therese Coupé, who we're doing Women Out Now. And that's also how I met Mark Cook. So then after Coyote, I went underground and joined the brigade. And that was about 2 years. And then I was arrested in 1978 and did a little time in federal prisons and in jail. And one of the things that then I got into the disability movement. And one thing I've focused on is that prisons and nursing homes and mental hospitals have a lot of the same torture. And I think we really should do abolition for all congregate living institutions. That's enough about me.
Okay. My name is Mark Cook. And at the age of 60, I spent 40 years of my life in prison, behind bars, as a juvenile, as a patient in a mental hospital, and later on as a teller. While I was in grade school, I didn't even know what a revolutionary was. I got invited with a little kid behind him snapping suspenders, and we had to go to the principal. We got a little bus paddle, and we came out crying. And this student came over to us. Now we're in the grade school, the 4th or the 5th grade. And he comes over and he puts his arm around us. He's from what's called an immigrant from Norway. During the Second World War, they sent the kids over to the various countries. But he comes over, puts his arm around us, and he says, "After the revolution, everything will be different." And I had no idea what a revolution was until I joined the Panthers it was in 1969. The Panthers came into being or founded 100 years after slavery ended, 1986. The Seattle Panthers began their chapter in 1968. And so we followed afterwards. We were the first 2 chapters of the Black Panther Party to start outside of Oakland in the United States. That's where I got my politics, beginning in my politics. And I did all the studying that was required, not all of the studying, but most of the studying required by the Panthers. And we had our propaganda sheet, the Black Panther newspaper for self-defense. We had great leaders. They were both out of college. They were Huey Newton and Robbie Seals. And they put out this program, the Black program for the Black Panther parties. And the people who joined had to learn each one of those points. Not only, but just totally knowing what they're doing to out to help their community. They got this philosophy from Mao, who said, if you're fighting oppression, you have to fight back your own oppression first, before you can try to fight somebody else's. That's the only way you're gonna know how oppression is universal, not just singular. The 2 points that I'm gonna try to refer to as we talk here is the points I use in prison to organize in prison, organize above ground and underground inside of the prison. And our underground was never really uncovered until I got out and run my mouth and told them how we did it, okay? And it was a great organizing thing for all prisoners. After forming the Black Panther Party, I had to kind of educate and inform other Panthers of what the whole struggle is about, not just with the Panthers, but around the world. And this wasn't difficult because I only used 2 points in the Panther program. We have to have the right to choose our own destiny, establish our own destiny in life, in communities within the world. And the second one is we have the right to free labor. Prison is slavery. It's founded by the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And it's probably the greatest betrayal within the Constitution that there was. Now, we understood that the native people here were the first nation in the United States. They could not blend in easily with this new way of people that came in. It's like you look at plant life, you have this invasive species like English ivory, yeah. And well, you can name a lot of things that came in and kind of disrupted the ecology of this country. And that's what happened when there was a huge invasion of people coming in this country. We interrupted an ecology that people had already got used to, knew how to live by, had everything they needed was there. And they destroyed some of the things that were needed by the people who were here. So they decided they're going to try what you call genocide. Genocide didn't work, trying to drive them out. And the other side said, we're going to try genocide. And tried to drive the Native American. It was an impasse of what's called kind of a Mexican standoff against. And so this is what our struggle. We can't really expect to have a singular community in the United States because it wasn't developed that way. Everybody came in and had their own community. And that's what racism built up, where they wanted to be separated. I talked to Leonard Peltier. I did Leonard Peltier in Leavenworth. And he told me that there's within every group, there's a division. In the Native American group, there's a traditional and a progressive. And he said, we know you're struggling the same way. As a Black Christian, you have your traditional and progressives. So it is a constant struggle. And when you start developing your universal political themes, you have to include the entire world to figure out how are we all going to live together. How can we all be that gregarious community? And it's very difficult. People are fighting, the various political ideologies, you want to call it, whether it's socialism or capitalism or whatever. They're constantly in struggle, but the main struggle is between working people and the bosses who use the working people. Everything that is the progressive of any economy comes from that struggle between working people and the bosses. And in Walla Walla, where I first started my struggle, looking to the Panther Party as a program, I figured we're slaves in here, and we have to kind of try to break away from this. And we resolved an experiment, 2-year experiment in Walla Walla, where prisoners formed their own company, paid themselves, control. They ran the whole thing. They received a funding of about $250,000. And that was the beginning where I saw my type of politics was going to work. I was using the guy for the Black Panther Party, second point. It was We want to hold employment for our people. And if not, we needed an income that we could live by, everybody could live by, but we had to get rid of slavery. People didn't look at us as slavery. That when Harry Tubman tried to help get slaves out, she got some out, she said, she'd have got a lot more out that they only knew they were slaves. And to this day, if you're in prison struggle, you can look to the people you're approaching, communicating with, and most of them do not really know that they are slaves. And that has disrupted our entire economy in the United States. And this is going to be the broadest community we deal with when we deal with the prisoner struggle, even though we give help to people outside of the United States. But this is our struggle, one that is affecting us most. And it is injury to all of us. When there is slavery, injury to one is injury to all. And you kind of have to understand that when you get in this struggle against capitalism, which is trying to control the paradigm, if you want to call it a class struggle. There's only one kind of struggle, that's class struggle. Excuse me. I picked this up with one of the prisoners in Oregon, no, in Nevada or something like that. But this is just this first introduction I'm gonna give about myself. I am still a Panther. And a lot of us still work together. Always in the penitentiary, I formed another Panther group. They didn't want to be called Panthers in Monroe. That was in 1969. And I went to prison for 24 years after working with the brigade, et cetera. And when I got out, I heard that the Black Prisoner Caucus, the group that I started in 1969, had grown. And it spread throughout most of the male prisons in the United States. To this day, a lot of you have worked with the Black Prisoner Caucus. And that is a legacy of the Black Panther Caucus. I tried to make Panthers out of them, but they were too timid. To become Panthers, but they figured we can get away with the culture. It grew and it died. Youngsters, again, youngsters are the ones who started a Panther Party. Understand that they were teenagers and people in their 20s. And when I gave this program to the people in Monroe, they were saying they were young. They were people in their 20s. And like I said, it died out. And I don't know, I talked to the Black Panther, these people recently, and they said that they believed the Black Prisoner Caucus started in 1972, of course, because they weren't born in 1969, they didn't know how it started. And I'm re-educating them, but they're educating me. I kind of felt that the Panthers fell flat on their face, leaving no legacy, real legacy to carry on. And it's there, they're waiting in prison. In most of the group meetings, there's always a BBC person in the crowd. I don't see any here right now. I don't think I do. I don't. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And the last meeting about a week ago, I met another one who said she's going to be a BBC member. She's a Black woman. So this is just an introduction to where I started. I started with the Black Panther Party. I'm not going to leave on. I'm going to talk further. If you want to ask questions, it's probably going to be attached to the template program, the Black Panther Party, because I want to continue. But I just got a shock when I found out that it was formed 100 years after slavery ended. That was my grandfather was born in 1866, so he was born 1 year after. Okay, that's just an introduction. Thank you.
So my name's Josh, and I haven't done half as much radical shit as the two revolutionaries sitting next to me. But my name is Josh Davidson, he, him pronouns, and I did edit this book, Rattling the Cages. History of political prisoners, North American political prisoners, and I also do a lot of other political prisoner support work. I'm a member of the Certain Days Freedom for Political Prisoners Calendar Collective, which has been around for 25 years, supporting political prisoners. And I also make greeting cards with another political prisoner, or a bank robber. And yeah, just offer support in any way I can to people inside and help amplify their voices.
So Josh, we're actually gonna start and maybe we touched on this just a second ago, but, I was gonna start with you with a question. What was the impetus for this book? Like, there's been a lot of books about prisoner struggle, not as many as there should, but there's been a lot. Why this book and why right now?
Sure, great question. And this book has been a process and a collective process at that. It's taken a lot of people to get this done and to get all these interviews compiled. There's almost 40 interviews in this book. And it's a project that I started with former political prisoner Eric King. Has anyone heard of Eric King? He just got out of prison a few months ago after 10 years inside for a nonviolent act of property destruction. And he and I wrote after he submitted a really beautiful poem to the Certain Days calendar. And this was probably 5 or 6 years ago. And we wrote about political prisoners and about revolutionaries and about the history that came before us, the movement and the struggle. And I would share essays by Sundiata Acoli or writings about the George Jackson Brigade. And we would talk about these people who suffered and struggled for a lifetime. And the book really grew out of that. It grew out of a desire to learn and to grow with the people who struggled before us and to to provide lessons, from the pain and the suffering and the struggling and the repression that they've faced over decades and decades. And it's something that we started when COVID first hit. So it's about 5 years now, almost 5 years ago. It took years and years to not only compile these interviews, but to correspond with the people who were in prison and who are still in prison for a number of these people. But I think that it's just as relevant now as it would have been at any other time. We're always facing repression by the state, as we see in Atlanta with Cop City and around the country. So learning these lessons now, I think, is just as important. And hopefully people in the struggle now can learn something from those who have come before.
Left hand people, do we have books left? Cool, there are books, that you will be able to purchase after the event outside of the table at the left bank books table. So Mark and Janine, I kind of wanted to pose this question to both of you. You can answer it however you see fit, but it's a broad question. Well, why is prisoner support important? And what did support mean to you when you were locked up? So that's kind of a big, broad question, but. Mark, do you want to go?
Well, first of all, they let me communicate with my co-defendants or comrades who were in other prisons. The outside support gave us that link. The institution didn't allow us to write letters to each other. So we just picked kind of probably the names and wrote to people who were supporting us outside. They passed it on to others who were inside. So we maintained contact, or at least I did, for over 24 years while I was in prison with my comrades outside. In fact, they were waiting for me to come out. Among the prisoners, I was the only black prisoner captured with the brigade. And they used that as a theme to help support not only me, but others. In fact, I was on a list with Mumia. It was Mark Cook and Mumia. Was the main thing that was driving to get me out. They got me out. They didn't get Mumia out. Kind of out of a solitary confinement, etc. There was movement there too. They were waiting for me when I got out, and I was one of those people who resisted getting out. I just figured I had so much time that there was no way I was going to get out. In fact, near the end, I had 2 life sentences, and they decided that was too much, and they decided to kick me out. I never even started those sentences. But when I got out, there was a community in Seattle waiting for me, a community that I never knew. I mean, I grew up in prison, they grew up outside. Some just were born when I came to prison, weren't even born when I came to prison, that they supported. And when I came out, I had $8,000 in my hand, I had a car, a place to stay, and a job. And that's rare, but this prisoner support, and this is a rare thing. I never asked for support. I never even, the only support I wanted to make contact with my comrades, because they were the ones who still in struggle. And of course, when I got out, we continued together, we found each other. And we used journalism as a means of struggle. Working with prisoners inside, the biggest struggle was California prisons. And we're able to get 60,000 prisoners to change the solitary confinement rules in California. They were communicating with us and sending staff to us. Didn't have no money. They were sending staff to do this journalism that we're doing. And later on, they had their relatives sending us money. This is Ed, me setting up in a small place up at Burien, I think it was. And most of that money was coming in. We had prisoners and the printed cartridges. Prisoners were paying for this. And they were communicating with themselves. They stopped what you call it, the aggression, the racial aggression in California. They made a memo that they had passed around and said there will be no more aggression while we're fighting this thing. And it broke the racist turmoil that was going on in Kansas that was going on. And they transferred in buses. They sat next to each other. And they had racial antagonism before, but at that point it stopped. And it was this is much a shock to Ed and myself that this happened, but we knew this journalism worked. And my first introduction to underground journalism brought in people from the Whitman College. These were supporters in Whitman College, the colleges in Walla, they came inside the prison eventually, got inside the prison and helped us further our journalism until we had an above ground journalism, not just the underground. The underground was considered a bomb. You know, a bomb gets a lot of attention. I don't care whether it's on paper or it's used in a firecracker. But it did attract all the prisoners. So this is something big. They wanted to see, and it was very short. It couldn't be any bigger than this. It was just folded paper like that, printed on both sides. That was the bomb inside. We reached 17% of the population, and it was passed on to everybody else. Always passed on. In fact, the administration got it because we did a little dirty, while we're at it. Things were, they were ripping us off, that's stealing food and supplies that belong to prisoners. But anyways, I'm just trying to say how people outside of prison supported prisoners and ex-prisoners. My meeting with Janine was as an outside person supporting prisoners and ex-prisoners. We did convention 72 here in Seattle. We drew in forms for 3 years, raised funds, and we never were broke. People were glad to give money to support the group. But it's things that I learned. My skills generally came from the Panthers. I just pretty much followed them. They had a Black Panther paper. We'd have journalism in various areas like that that covered everybody, not just blacks. They're not just a black community. Some of the contacts sent me to China as a prisoner. People in Hong Kong, University of Hong Kong, wanted to know what black prisoners were doing inside, how we were struggling with some of the stuff that was going on in the streets and in prisons. So I gave a little presentation up there. I'm not all that good with making presentations like this because I'm autistic. Sometimes I forget what I'm talking about. And I really am. Told these people to look out and stop me when time comes. Sometimes I don't know what they want me to talk right now about the support. Why do we want the support from outside people? Why don't we want the support from outside people? This is our connection to the community. And we couldn't do that with slavery over 200 years ago. They had no support that they could readily give from outside. Some support came in, the abolitionists. Of course, they succeeded. And again, they're picking it up today trying to fight the abolition of prison. And a lot of them, believe me, you got to focus on the idea that there are slaves inside a prison. They're no longer just black slaves. Anybody who gets convicted is a slave for life. When you get out, there's things you can't do. Even if you're an ex-convict, there's no such thing as an ex-convict. You're a convict for life. Places you can't live, things you cannot have. You have to have, if you do a contract, you're supposed to tell your parole officer when you do your contract. When I got out the first time, I had to get a contract. My getting married was a contract. I had to go to the parole officer and have permission. He had to come down and interview my wife. Like my fiance, give me permission to marry. And there's a lot of restrictions and provisions that are put to people on parole. These are ex-prisoners, not ex-convicts, but ex-prisoners. And they have to abide by this. It's hard living. When you come out of the slave and don't have that much money, it's gonna be a real struggle trying to get a job to start off, a place to stay. And you see this. I'm going too far. I really stop me.
Yeah, I never wanna stop you, Mark. The one thing that you didn't quite make clear in a story, part of your story that I love is when you actually took over the prison in Walla Walla, not the security part, but the other part. I think that kind of organizing is phenomenal. I don't have much to add as far as what, prisoner support does, except to say, I think you can keep prisons from torturing prisoners if they have a lot of community support. That, I didn't experience that personally, but there were some political prisoners that I was in prison with that did. And it was because of their community contact. That's my only ad.
Thank you for those answers, yeah. I think a lot of us in the room are deeply indebted to the people who have come before us, and so hearing about the struggles of the prisoners that came before us and the prisoner support on the outside is just really wonderful. Josh, I wanted to come back to you for a second and ask you, so the book is an oral history, and I wanted to ask specifically, what was the importance of doing oral histories for the book?
Sure. Yeah, so the main objective with this book is to raise awareness and raise funds for and about political prisoners. So I didn't want to take their words and change them, beyond regular editing. So with I think 36 people included in here, there are oral histories that were done over the phone. There were people who sent their answers via email. For people in prison, a lot of them had to handwrite them. There were dozens and dozens of handwritten pages, which we had to transcribe. And then luckily I was able to do a lot of Zoom interviews with several people who have since gotten out of prison. But the whole point was to amplify their voices and their perspectives and their ideas for the future of struggle. And I think that the best way to do that is oral histories. I know I've read a lot of oral histories about the movement and, with people in the movement, and it's always inspiring to hear from their exact words, what motivates them, what keeps them going, what they see as the future for us. So that was the main objective in doing oral histories. And I didn't mention before, but the book is also a fundraiser for political prisoners. So 50% of the proceeds go to the Anarchist Black Cross Federation War Chest, which provides monthly stipends to people who are currently in prison for political reasons. And the other half goes to Eric, so that, like Mark was saying, he can have some sort of support when he gets out, not when he's out of prison, something to fall back on and something to hopefully provide some sort of stability for him. Yeah.
And actually, in the book, for those of you that haven't read it, there are many entries from political prisoners in there. Well, all of them are worth reading, but I think that's it. I've seen very few places where I could actually get a sampling of political prisoners who would mention even revolution. So that might be a motivation to buy that book.
Absolutely. And part of it actually comes from the idea of visiting prisoners. For me, I visited a lot of prisoners. It started almost 20 years ago with David Gilbert, and it's continued with other people since then. But the book is also kind of set up in that fashion of each chapter is a different person, a different current or former political prisoner. And each chapter is set up in 3 different sections. One is prison life, and that just kind of deals with everyday life, what it's like in prison and how they survive it and sometimes even thrive in it. And the second section is politics and prison dynamics, and that's kind of how they maintain their politics in prison, how they spread their political convictions and help organize in prison. And then the third part is looking forward. It's just, you know, what they see as the future of our movements and what they think will work, to help us progress and help, you know, create a world without prisons. So I think oral histories really do a great job in that regard.
The next question, I actually kind of wanna change my order up to them here. And Janine, I have a question for you. Maybe. So, there's often an overrepresentation of men inside militant movements for liberation. Could you explain some of the importance of working with the women you met inside prison and how that related to your organizing in the Seattle community?
You're asking me how working with women inside?
Yeah, so, yeah, kind of like, you know, when we are talking about revolutionary movements, like, I think that there's often an overrepresentation of, men's organizing. And so I'm curious to hear how your organizing inside correlated to your organizing outside, or how it didn't.
There wasn't a huge correlation to organizing inside. I ended up trying to form a collective that every woman I talked to almost was wanting to have more contact with their families and kids outside. And so I set up a steering committee and got people from inside and helped them start a children's center. And so I guess that had to do with, that was my politics. I wanted there to be a collective. But I also think it's not surprising there's an overrepresentation of men. We are in a patriarchy. And that if we could have more, if I could have gotten more women prisoners active, it would have been great, but we were not successful in that at all. So I mainly talked on a personal, but I do think there's a whole thing that has to do with slavery and women and that many were not willing to be strong and lead and wanted to be quiet and not noticed, which I think is hard to do. It's hard to lead when you're in prison, but and my brain just lost my subject. So
I'll give you a little bit back. I met some of Janine's friends. They had started a Women Out Now as a group of women who went inside of prisons, the children of prisoners, brought them to the prisons for visits. And it's kind of set me into that community too. And it grew. They're the ones that joined convention, where they organized a convention that I spoke about earlier. They had their own journalism, the Looking Glass. This is the Looking Glass. Some people are still familiar with that, yeah. And the various newsletters like that going on, dealing with women prisoners and prisoners in prison. In the Panthers, 2/3 of the Panthers, I would say, were women doing the actual work. The men were mostly doing the rhetoric, politicizing. But then we put them out on the streets. Everybody has their own newspapers. And it influenced some of the people working with Women Out Now. Women who became underground people, who worked in the underground. Janine was one of them. And so half of the underground was women, half were men. And there was no authoritarianism in there. And nor the matrimonial, what you want to call it, the leadership by women. It was a mixed leadership, getting the work done, getting the attention of the community on the problems that are occurring inside of prisons. And if you ever read Really USA, you find it mapped out in there every time an action, we're using a bomb to get somebody's attention, there was always a communicate explaining what it was about. All prisons are different, prisons are prisons, all prisons are different. You can't expect to see in every prison the same, what's called the provisions of how prisoners are put to work or educated or not educated. But it was important to start involving with it. And when Ed and I did the journalism with the California prisoners, it's very hard to get prisoners who are women to work with us. We got some wanted to work in, but they ain't had enough of men, you know, the only way I can put it. And they didn't want to join with us because it's all about men. Well, most of the men in the population are supposed to be men. But we did communicate with women who were in solitary confinement, just like the men were. And so we struggled together. And like it's all, nothing comes easy. It is a struggle. And as Ed and I worked together, we tried our very hardest to get more and more women involved, and it just didn't happen. They came in and they had their own discussions about how they wanted to deal with men. And like in every prison, it was the same way. When we started our movement in Walla Walla, they reached out to Purdy. The women used to be right next door to men in Walla Walla, until they closed that prison down, they put it in Purdy. And we did make some kind of communications. We were able to use what's called the cassette tapes and things to talk to them back and forth. That was working. I never stayed in that prison long enough to really commit myself or give my input or into what was going on there. And I think it would have helped if they could have started journalism within the women's prison. It never did happen that I know. But I work with the women out now. Well, I put it out on parole. And then some of those women were outstanding. We started our own prison business called Pivot, where just prisoners working there and running it, pretty much running it. And we got women who are coming out of prison, women who are on parole or probation, and they worked in this program too. So it was a kind of another experiment with our politics, and it was working. We were given a lot of support to carry on with that. Again, you guys let me run off.
Mark, you mentioned Ed a couple of times. I had a question for you. So it said, in his piece, in the book, Ed talks directly about how the prison administration's first line of defense is like white supremacist groups like AB and other groups like that, Aryan Brotherhood. What are some good takeaways from those fights against prison admins with white supremacist backing for anti-fascists today?
Well, mostly when you talk about the issues that affect them, affect everybody the same. In prison, when we did it, a prison was a prison, but when we wanted to fight certain things that were going on, abuses by the administration, and we did this underground newspaper called The Bomb, and they never knew who was writing this, what the color was, or what the nationality. You couldn't look at it and tell who was writing this. But they started following, I don't know how to put it, the prison paradigms. Oh yeah, it keeps coming up that word. I hate that word. It keeps coming up. How prisoners live in prison. Everybody knew you had to keep yourself tucked in. You had to keep your hair cut short. When you go to visiting, there was rules what you did when you got in there, etc. But running an underground newspaper and forcing the administration to give us some things they didn't want to give us. We had to speak in a language that was common to everybody, where you couldn't pick out somebody that causes antagonism. And it worked. When we wrote a sort of a constitution, how we wanted the whole prison plan, eventually we got it. We wanted a plan. We go way over shooting the moon, going for things beyond anything the prison could do for us. And he said, no, we're not going to accept that, write it again. And we'd say that people, now, we were underground, but we also did work above ground. And after we wrote that constitution, they looked for people who had enough smarts to write it for them. They didn't know who we were getting, so they got us. And so we'd say in an underground newspaper, talking about the people who wrote the paper as in opposition, we say, those people are selling you out, writing this constitution. You see all that stuff they put in there, what they can let the administration do and blah, blah. And we say, take your constitutions in front of the mess hall, pile them up and burn them. So everybody in the institution brought them to the front of the mess hall and burned them. These are people who had antagonism against each other. We got them together, right? Even though we lied to them, we had to lie to each other. And like being anonymous helped a lot. And then one guy, he had a way of getting everybody together that everybody wanted to grow their hair. They wanted mustaches, sideburns, or long hair, etc. And that's because that's against the rules, and so they lock people up for growing hair like that. So he made this little sign and put it on a wooden stick and marked it around and said, on it, and said, if you care, grow hair. And next thing you know, everybody in the penitentiary is growing hair. Nobody got drifted, and that covered everybody. You have to, takes a lot of studying in prison, like every prison is different. You find out what is it that bugs everybody. And that's what you tap. You say, we want that changed, but we also want something to go along with it. And we try and make it look like we're gonna do you a favor by doing this, like we had our uniforms, our denim uniforms, shirts and pants with a number on each, And we said, well, if we buy our own clothes, you guys wouldn't have to buy them for us. And it took a long time, but eventually that's what happened in Walla Walla. People were buying their own clothes long before they had these orange things that's going on right now. And it's, in a sense, we tricked them. There is a way. There is a way. You just have to learn how to present something that is wanted by all prisoners, present everybody's complaint, and present everybody's solution. Yeah. And that has a lot to do with journalism. And journalism is, they try to avoid that in prison. It's journalism, they want to censor everything. For the undergrounds, you don't want that.
This is a quick follow-up. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how this related to what Janine was referencing earlier about your time at Walla Walla, I do believe.
Oh.
Janine, you had a specific.
Wasn't it Walla Walla where you took over the prison?
Yeah, we did. And again, we had.
We already hear about that.
But being underground, we're revolutionary. We want things and nobody else thinks, well, we can't share. Okay. We were writing this document for the institution called Resident Governmental Council, changing the name of prisoner and making it sound nice. We wanted to have that a council in the prison that ran half of the prison and administration run the other half. And finally, they actually agreed to this constitution. It did. It was called Resident Governmental Council. But they didn't know us people underground had other plans. There was one prisoner in there who's been a life sentence. He's a youngster who got in trouble. He had a second-degree murder. But just one of the things that happened in life. And he's Canadian too. And so before we wrote the final draft of the paper, we said, hey, this we can use this as part of our thing that emphasis that moves us along. And RGC was Resident Governmental Council that also meant Rogers goes to Canada. Okay, this is the guy we're gonna get out of prison. So once we got things formed, we made him president of this organization. And he could go outside of prison and come in, go down to the minimum security and, help them out with their grievances, bring them back, come in. And get out and in, and one day he went out and never came back. This is documented, so you can somehow look it up and find out about it. When they tried to extradite him back from Canada, Canada said no, we're not gonna send him back. And he stayed up there and he got a job working in what they call a spaghetti factory. It's a restaurant. And he's a manager there. Well, we had to have a little entertainment while we're trying to help prison. And this is from 1968. This is about when it started. All the activities were going on. We had a racist incident where white prisoners didn't want the black prisoners to see one movie, a movie of 100 Rifles with Rocco Welch and Jim Brown, a black and a white actor get together. And so they said, no, you're not gonna have that in this movie. They had us outnumbered. So you got us outnumbered. Okay, but we're just not gonna go to work. So all the black prisoners locked down. And they'd go to work and come back and still see us in a cell, having a nice time, et cetera. So they just wanted to join in and said, we're gonna stand with the black prisoners. They stayed in, okay? The next thing you know, the administration wants to know what's going on. And they called some of us into the superintendent's office and said, what's going on? We said, it's racism, and we're not gonna handle it, we're gonna fight it. And he said, well, what do you mean racism? I don't see no racism. This president, he's been running it, I don't know how many years. And in every cell block, they had these little number tags. When the person comes in, there's number tags in the slot, shows which cell you're supposed to go to. And they had the white cells, the blue cells, and the orange cells, you know, for Native Americans, whites, and blacks, and people of color. And he said, oh, I didn't know that was going on. So that was the beginning. Yes, so that was the beginning. The inmates arguing against what's happening in the population. And we started showing other things. They wouldn't let us have certain jobs, white jobs that you could learn skills in, like working in the powerhouse. Blacks were not allowed to work in there. We worked here in the laundry. We worked in the back. The jobs that the women had outside of presses and mangles. And that the white prisoners worked in front where they could learn the skills of the washing machines and the riggers, etc. And so one day I was working in the back, and I was going to work. It's lunchtime. I got out and they're going down the ramp, etc. And I was the last one in there with the boss. I called the boss over and said, "Hey, you got to stop this shit. You got to break it up and put some black prisoners up here on the machine." He says, "Good, don't tell me what to do, blah, blah, blah." And I pushed it inside of an extract. And I closed it, you know, and that wasn't a good idea at all. I was walking out and I heard that thing coming back there and I knew what it could do to it. So I went back in and shut it off, popped the lid. And I was just going in a hole for it. And they kept interviewing for a disciplinary action. So, what the heck were you doing? I said, I just doing what I was thinking is right. And this one superintendent, he says, "You don't do what's right, you do what we tell you to do." And so, yeah, that was my first real struggle in the wallet, the fighting racism. And I couldn't stop after I got there. When they caught me on the yard, these other Canadian prisoners, they were the main ones who were doing the underground newspaper. And I was a Black Panther at that time. And they were playing handball and I was playing basketball, and they called me over and said, "Hey, we heard what happened, blah, blah. You want to get it on our newspaper?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "We know you're trying to make that bomb." At work, I worked in the metal plant. I made a bomb out of a pipe, you know, it was about a 4-inch bomb. And they used to give us matches. We used to scrape off the tips, you know, and drop them in. And I think nobody knew what I was doing. And these guys working next to me come over and said, "They know what you're doing. You better get rid of that." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, if you stick with us, we'll give you a real bomb." And they talked to me. They talked to me, explained what the bomb was about. It's the name of the new underground newsletter that they're working on. They had figured out how to make a newsletter that they could distribute among the prisoners. And they needed wider distribution. And as a Panther, I had the Black population. Well, they had other people in different other populations. We put it in the mess hall, we put it in the recreation, never letting anybody know who's laying them out here and there. And so we got a 17%. Well, I'm getting on. See, I don't want to talk about this.
I think that we're all really enjoying it.
Yeah, this farm propaganda is what it was, and that's pretty much what I got into when I got out. The brigade. Got me pretty good.
Really glad we're recording this. So, at this point, I kind of wanted to have people pass, if anybody had any specific questions for anyone on the panel, if they wanted to pass those cards forward, and we can kind of take a look and see if anybody, yeah,
Just raise them up.
yeah, that's the fastest way to pass them.
Why don't they, some people, yeah, I don't.
The middle of
Oh,
the-
one part.
Did the middle not get cards? Okay, does anybody have extras? if people want to pass those towards the middle, and then as we're going through, I don't know how many we're gonna do exactly, how are people feeling? How are people feeling? Good?
Moves along. Okay.
And I just want to reiterate. Jay mentioned Ed, we've mentioned Ed a few times, and for those who don't know, that's Ed Dean. He was a founding member of the Jackson Brigade, and he passed away just a few months ago. There's a statement written outside about Ed, if anyone wants to pick it up or share it or read it. He was a really amazing person. And
Was indeed, and it's a great statement.
yeah,
A great journalist too. He wrote a lot of different journals, newspapers. That were sent into prison that got things done.
There's a question here, actually, it says, is there a memory or story about Ed that you can share to give those who did not know him an idea of who he was?
Well,
There's a lot, yeah.
yeah, part of his life, he was racist. He admitted it. In Canada, and the antagonism was against the whites and the Native Americans. But anyways, he told me a lot of stories like that about what was going on in Canada and how eventually he changed when he went to wall to wall and did the demonstration against Vietnam up there. That's when he became politicized. People started gave him left information to read. He wasn't a journalist, but he was reading all of them. One of the funny things, this person, very personal. It's in his book, but he doesn't tell it in the book like he told it to me. He had a girlfriend in Canada, and he wanted to impress her one day, so he got his revolver out. Oh, that's a one bullet, spun it, put it against the head. It didn't go off, first time. He's been again, and finally he shot his eye out. So, Ed only had one eye, right? So that's the story he told me in his book. He tells the next story.
They only have one eye.
Yeah. So in his book, it's called The Lumpen. It's a very good book. I think it's very unusual too, especially for people, LGBT people, because he was both, so he lived two different lives, sex lives, you can put it that way.
Janine, do you have any anecdotes about Ed you'd like to talk?
I don't have one that's come up, but I really, and his book is called Lumpen, and that's pretty good too, because he does talk about being totally apolitical. Now, he did turn into a heavy duty Marxist Leninist. We can
Yes,
have it
too,
quite
huh?
a bit.
What about when you got out, how much of that $8,000, I mean, how much he did to support you getting out, and when you got out, Cynthia, you want to pick on that a little bit?
Well, I inherited some money when I got out, along with $8,000. Ed and I got together and we decided for every political prisoner that got out, we was gonna give $100 for every year they spent inside of prison. So we got getting a few prisoners, probably Marilyn Buck, the woman who helped engineer the escape of Assad Shakur. She's in Cuba right now. We've got a $2 million bail on bombing affairs. But anyways, when Marilyn Buck was about to get out, me and Ed lumped together some money. I got it. I think it was about 15,000. I can't remember. Because we had this extra money that came in from almost, no, we're just lucky anyway. We had the money, so we was giving this out, and she died less than weeks after she got out. That was pretty sad. And he was an anarchist that got out when we gave him some money that he kind of, I don't know how you put it. He told the administration in order to get out that he was never going to get involved in that again. Well, he did his job. He worked, but before that, a lot of people were intimidated and broke down. I was told that they were going to let me out. I got back with the Panthers and said, you can't go back with the Panthers at all. I was an old person. And I said, you talk about Gray Panther? And I saw, I didn't say anything. But when I got up, sure enough, I went straight back to the Panthers after what's going on. And the Panthers accepted me when I got out in Seattle, helped get me support. There was a big, welcoming party when I got out. And that's when all the left in Seattle came to the little house on King Street. Oh, God, I guess about 14th and King Street, they call it King Street House anyways, the attic is hanging. And there wasn't room for everybody inside. And I got gifts from people, you know, across the ocean and people in Seattle and more money than I actually needed. And that was real business support. And it was embarrassing because I didn't want to get out. I was too old. I had sick. What my plans on organizing in prison already. And it just interrupted. I did a really fantastic thing. And the court wouldn't allow us to do these simultaneous court things on a specific grievance. And so we printed one document up, photocopied it. It had a little to do with burglary. We went to and used machines that it didn't know we were using inside. Mailed them to different prisons and told them to send it all to one court. Now the court said it would not allow us to do a class action. But when they got all those, they had to do a single thing, so they decided, okay, they would do a class action, and they did. I like that. I thought it was
Yes, wife Cynthia Scott do a lot to get you out?
She was
Or
tremendous.
did she changed your mind so you would get out?
It was her and an attorney named, oh gosh, Nancy Morgan. And they had, Nancy Morgan had a boyfriend in prison. And when she took him before the parole board, he was wearing one of the Fremont Cook t-shirts. And the parole board looked at it and said, we don't have t-shirts, you know, and we want to see Mark Cook. And so they tried to get me to go before the parole board, and I kept refusing. And finally they came to Seattle and they had the professionals down here make a videotape of me and my pictures of my family and community outside. And they presented that to the parole board. And the parole board insisted they wanted to see me. I have 2 life sentences plus to do. I haven't even got started on life sentences. And they looked at that and interviewed me and told me, you know, we're thinking about it. So if you get out, you're gonna have to break loose from the Panthers. I said, there ain't no way. No way. So they called me back in another year and told me, if you go through this simple program, we'll let you out in 1 year's time. I went through their program, but I never broke. I tell you that, never broke. Okay.
I got a question for you, Josh. It says, what kinds of prison censorship and suppression tactics did you face while trying to conduct the oral history interviews? And if any, like, how did you overcome?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there were many hoops, in terms of getting this book done. I sent the call out or the request to participate in this project to many people in prison. 2 in particular, Mumia Abu Jamal and Leonard Peltier. I sent the call out or the invite to them 5 different times. And I only found out like when the book was, once it was being printed, that they never received any of them. For other people, especially in Pennsylvania, where they scan the mail and send that mail into people, I found out that they were only getting 1 side paperwork that I was sending in, so they were only getting half the questions I was sending in. And that's become the case in more and more states now that are scanning the mail as opposed to getting the actual mail that people send in. So there are several people that are not included here who we would have loved to have been included. There are also parts in here where, you know, I wouldn't get. There were some people who wrote me, 50 pages, and they'd send out 5 or 10 different envelopes with all their answers. And sometimes I didn't get all the answers. Sometimes I got a few pages, sometimes I didn't get others. So the whole process was very time consuming. Very, I probably use a whole forest of trees just communicating with people in prison for this. But that hasn't stopped. I found out there's, I think, 8 or 9 of the contributors are still in prison. And about half of them have not gotten the book yet. And we found out one of my fellow Certain Days Calendar Collective members, Anachli, who's a Chicano political prisoner in Texas. He was recently told that the book has been banned in Texas for one page by Jake Conroy, which is a simple chapter about how he made money selling candy and other things in the South. One paragraph about how he made money, and then leads to middle prisoners in Texas to read this book. Also in Alabama, Michael Kimball hasn't gotten the book, and there's a few others who I haven't heard from, but I don't know that they've gotten it. So I don't expect that the repression and censorship will stop at all. You know, once they find out what's in this book, it may be banned even more. And I'll just briefly read a short paragraph from Ed Mead while we're here. Just one brief paragraph that I've read at a few other events, and it just kind of, I think, shows kind of revolutionary Ed was. He said, "There are different kinds of outside support. The best outside support I had brought me pounds of gunpowder, ammunition, and a pistol, things that I could use, not mere handling. That was my definition of outside support. So there are different definitions of outside support. Listen to the prisoners. What do they need? If you're lucky, you won't be listening to a prisoner like me."
For people who are familiar, and there's some Left Bank Collective members here today, one of the things that's written, I think, in Ed's book is the first call that he made when he got out was to Left Bank Books, because he knew that Left Bank was going to have his back and support him, and they needed to know that he was out. So that's just a little part of the way in which our outside organizing and our inside organizing really coalesce in a real way.
And I think Ed might have some family here tonight too, right? Or if someone else is there.
No, they didn't make it.
I just grabbed two more questions. These questions are all great, but we would literally be here past the time that is reasonable for everybody. So I grabbed one that is specific and one that is broad.
Oh, Sandy. Oh my, yes, one thing.
Yeah, go ahead. Always.
So I had a partner for over 20 years. He stood by me to take care of my son when I first went to prison. Prisoner promised to take care of him, rolled him over on me, so to speak, he was taking witness. And my partner, Sandy Hastings, she took care of my son. But prisoner support, she had a class at Seattle Community College, teaching weaving. And we got the class to weave this huge poster, you probably seen it up here. And on it says free MC and free Mark Cook. That's what it said. And it hung in this Seattle Community College for over 24 years. When I got out, I went down there and saw it was still up there. And I think the Seattle, what was that newspaper across the east side? Seattle something. Interviewed me and asked me that.
The stranger?
Stranger asked me. And they put it on the front page, you know, a picture of the weaving, and it was taken down, disappeared, don't know where it went. But when did the weaving, she raised money for me, about $1,500, sold it to the college. And so we got a little money from them and a little, you know, publication, you know, publicity, a little publicity. And I really didn't know that was happening until I finally got out of the funniest thing that I ever seen, that one of the teachers turned on the whole industry. Well, that's just a story. There's a lot of small stories like that. Sandy gave me a lot of support when I was transferred from prison to prison. I spent about 17 times I was in federal custody. And they would send my son from one city to another. People like the Quakers would pick him up and take him from one prison and bring him into prison. She would come herself sometimes and bring him, and later on brought my grandson to the prison. And you know, all Leavenworth, Atlanta, Lompoc, I can't name all the prisons that was in it. People brought him in. They sent him in by plane by himself to certain cities that he'd take him up, bring him in and visit him. And sad song, but he was as political I was, and he ended up on the street with a lot of people. You see them in the tents now. He's making it. And I love him. Yeah, I left, I was pain, but I left. For all the parents out there.
Mark, could you tell us a little bit more about the agreement to end the hostilities, when you all were organizing in California? So you had mentioned earlier, talking about bringing different groups inside the
So
prison
this is
together.
a decision made by the prisoners. It started off when he's writing to people in solitary confinement, and where they could send them books or whatever. And he offered to sell their artwork, paintings or whatever, craft work. It was he put it online for sale. And these are the people he started working to get information on solitary confinement, how long they've been down there, how hard it is to get out. Well, as it progressed, there were about 3 different strikes started up, maybe with 30,000 people, maybe 45, and then later 60,000 prisoners had joined in. And these people in solitary confinement, long-term, were the shot callers. They kept this thing going. In other words, sending out words into the population, have to support these guys, and they were sending the stamps and the money to me and Ed to do this thing. But they also knew there was antagonism that was going on in prison, in most all prisons, But it was pretty bad in California. I mean, these, for the gladiator school and stuff, in order to get ready to fight the races and things like blood in, blood out, means you had to kill somebody if you want to get into the organization. You want to get out, it's going to be your blood getting you out. These were hard convicts. But they all started focused on solitary confinement, how easy it was to throw somebody in there and they never get out, And then he died of different suicide or just dying from just illnesses. And so they had this memorandum that they wrote up that told everybody to cease antagonisms between races and gangs and come together for one. This is something that affects everybody in the prison. And like I say, some people live in, imagine living 30 years in solitary confinement. And sometimes they put the racial antagonists together. Well, as this was going on, those people, blacks and whites in the same cell said, we got to break it up outside. We got to we broke it up here in solitary confinement. We got to get those people upstairs and break it up. And they did. They took the oath, and there was no antagonism for a long time until long after the thing had settled, after they had settled that argument. Then they went right back to their own business again. Prisons are prisons, no matter where they are, but they're all different. You can't use any one for a model. The little tricks we pull down in your wall, that may never happen again. But I like that the stories are getting out about that they can do something like that. And knowing convicts, they always figure a way to keep tunnel out and stuff like that. And one of these days, they're gonna figure out how to do it underground newspaper. They haven't got nothing else to do.
I think this will be our last question, and it's for everybody on the panel. So it says, aside from supporting prisoners, organizing on the inside, what are effective ways for outside movements to fight for an end to prison slavery and abolition? Are there current calls, campaigns, targets, anything going on right now?
Well, the only thing I did when I got out, I helped start an organization with probably the socialists, it's called Organized Workers Labor Solidarity. And then we meet once a month at a union hall, various union halls. We fund ourselves just by passing the hat every meeting, we pass the hat. We made a couple $100 to pay the rent or make flyers, etc. And I wanted them, I couldn't get them to focus on the prison movement. It was just a general movement. It had to include everybody. Everybody had a struggle. Came to us, we'd help them with it in various ways. We did unionize, place that were never unionized before. The last public defenders, I helped unionize that. It became part of SEIU. There was farmers up in the north that didn't have any union at all. We struggled with them all. But my politics aren't narrowed down to any one thing. The two things I fight the most as a right to vote. Everybody who is born in the United States has a right to vote and should never be taken away. The imprisonment is no, that should be taken away just because you're in prison or hit with a felony. And that's one of the biggest sellouts we have that ever happened in the Constitution. Letting slavery exist too. Workers have rights. Workers are the main part of any economy, whether it's socialist or capitalist. When workers stop working, economy stops, right? It's in prison, when they go on strike, as the workers stop working, the prison has bigger bills to pay. They have to pay all their staff overtime and do a lot of things. But it's hard to get prisons to unionize. They get tired of it. I remember the strikes in California. They try to say, well, if you guys come out, we'll give you strawberry cake. I swear they did. You know, make the break the strike, and they wouldn't do it. I was in, I don't know how many strikes, or in riots. And there's no conclusion. It does come to a conclusion. You just get tired, all your energy runs out, all your hormones will stop producing anything. Strikes over, we did the best we could. It's forgotten until the next instance that comes along. It's a hard struggle for, like I say, for people to understand they are slaves and they really have to fight against it. It hurts us outside in the workers' movement. That slave exists inside it. They say, well, we pay you any way we want. And a fight just get that $15 an hour rate recently. And you have to start at the bottom. People at the bottom or the desperate poor get the minimum wage, then it raises everybody up. If they get the right to vote, you know, it helps outside this. They vote against oppression, you know, oppressive legislation and stuff like that. It will help us. I wish I could articulate it better, and I think a lot of you can, how important it is to stop slavery and give everybody who's born in the United States the right to vote.
And I'll just add, you know, join an anarchist Black Cross group, connect with the Puget Sound prisoner support, write to someone in prison. You know, anything you can do to make a connection with people behind bars is something that will help burn the, you know, burn these buildings to the ground and, you know, get rid of what's keeping them apart.
And support Left Bank and Greenwood.
Okay. Did you see the T-shirt? Okay.
Yes.
We are cuddly, cozy, cuddly, armed and dangerous, and we're gonna raise a fucking Christmas to the ground. That's all.
Thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. This has been really wonderful.